very warm welcome, Lavender Menace. I'm Nyla Ahmed and I'll be your chair for this event, which means that I have the absolute pleasure of speaking to Shane Strachan and Mae Diansangu, thank you, about reimagining the archive. Mae Diansangu is a queer poet and spoken word artist from Aberdeen. She has performed at literary festivals across Scotland and appeared on BBC Scotland's Big Scottish Book Club and BBC Radio 4's Tongue and Talk. Her series of poems, Black Lives, Heavy Truths, is part of the National Library of Scotland's collection. You can read her work in the anthologies Tales for the Doric Side, that's a great pun, and Recreation, a queer poetry anthology. Mae writes in both English and Doric, and her first collection, BLOODSONGS, will be published in autumn 2024 by Tapsalteerie.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Shane Strachan's debut poetry collection, Dwams, will be published in April by the same publisher, because I don't think I can do that again. He was awarded Scots Champion at the 2023 Scots Language Awards, following his year as the National Library of Scotland's Scots Scriever. His previous works include novella Nevertheless, Sparky Tales in Bulawayo, podcast, film and exhibition The Bill Get Blind, and multiple poems and stories in Gutter, New Writing in Scotland, Northwards Now, Stand and others. His poetry has also appeared on BBC Radio 4 and an Aberdeen art gallery. He holds a PhD in creative writing from the University of Aberdeen, where he now lectures in creative writing. So before we kick off, I'll just let you know the format of this event. So we're going to have some amazing readings from Shane and Mae, and then I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for your questions. Don't be shy, there's no such thing as a daft question, just go for it. So yeah, let's get started. And first I'd like to ask you all to join me in welcoming Mae and Shane. So we're going to have readings, and I think Mae, you're going to go first.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, it's so nice to see everyone here. I see a few faces that I recognise, which is really lovely. Hello everyone. It's always very weird being introduced. I say it's weird, I wrote that bio, but I still feel very uncomfortable when having to give bios, because that doesn't really say anything about me or my work or anything. It's just a sort of, I've done these things, so I'm kind of legitimately allowed to be here. So a few things about me. I write about myself, and I write about fucking and being weird and things like that. So, and I do swear. So that's maybe some things that you can expect for the next 10 minutes or so that I'm going to be reading. So what I'm going to share with you is something that I wrote a couple of years back. I don't have a good concept of time, I'll say 2-3 years ago. And it was for LGBT History Month, and it was with the Scottish BPOP writers. And I have a bit of trouble with history, and this is maybe, I'm not going to contextualise it too much. I think I'll just read it, and we can go from there. But it's called Queer Afro-Historicism, Speaking Life into an Unlived Past. The way we map out history is inherently queerphobic. Historical timelines are, by design, unwaveringly straight. They are indisputable lines travelling single-mindedly from one point of time to another, cause and effect, beginning and end. But queer temporality is a different beast. Plotting our histories on a straight line will never accurately represent the ingenious ways queer folk can manipulate time. How many of us have time travelled to a queer youth we were unable to live? Resources we may have today which were unavailable to our younger closeted selves, like queer community, gender euphoria, familial acceptance, etc., can help us live out experiences we might have had in an alternative past. As a black queer person, I am drawn to alternative pasts and speculative futures. Linear time says that the future is a blank space we are designed to fill. For black queer people, the same is often true of the past. When black queer history is erased, there is power in recreating and reimagining it. This is what I call queer Afro-historicism, visions of potential black queer histories that we were never given the chance to remember. Queer Afro-historicism is more than simply relating historical facts. Like Afrofuturism, it is speculative. It is an opportunity to fill the gaping archival silence with our own voices, lending them to our black queer ancestors so we can hear what they might have said. Robert Jones Jr. does this beautifully in his debut novel, The Prophets, presenting a version of black queer history in the mythical and queer-affirming kingdom of Kosongo. Robert Jones Jr. shows how history can be unidirectional for black queer people. We can go back in time to write ourselves, and on return, we absorb those worlds of possibilities into our present day bodies. They say you can't change the past, but you can certainly queer it. Linear time is a Western concept. It demands that we constantly project ourselves forward and paint the future we want to see. But why limit our creative powers to inventing possible futures? The past is also ours to dream. So as I was saying to Nyla earlier, I'm here at this event and I'm coming from the space where I've not really used a lot of archival stuff in my work, but I'm thinking about archives and, you know, all that I was speaking about there. It's about the gaps and the potential, and a lot of the time the missed potential, and how we as queer people, how that can feel, and what do we do with those gaps? How do we fill them in? And one thing I've been thinking about with my own work, and it's like, there's almost a pressure to create a legacy, because it's like, oh well, that stuff's not there, and now people are listening, so what do we want to say and how do we want to be thought of? And I think one of the conflicts that I have with that is when you have a marginalized identity, or more than one marginalized identity that intersects, you can still find yourself talking about yourself in relation to the default, you know, and it's like you're kind of defining yourself by what you're not sometimes, and it's like sometimes I think that's okay, but how much of that do we want to do, and is that the only thing we can do? So I would have some kind of thoughts that this next short piece is, I don't know what it is, if it's a poem or whatever, it's just a kind of thought experiment coming from that place. And if I only ever write against the thing I am not, what kind of space do I create? What shape will I take when I only make poetic around the default edges? Grammatically speaking, you and me and us are not universal. That's why they call them personal pronouns. I used to decapitalize my poems because I thought every word should be equally important. Now every I is emboldened so as to make sure I am the center of my own universe. And it's something that I think about a lot, and the image of a fingerprint kind of came up because I guess that's sort of like, you know, that's kind of a fitting image for legacy or something that's left behind. And without the gaps in a fingerprint, you know, without the negative space, it's not a fingerprint. But when you look at a fingerprint, you don't just see the negative space, you see it as the whole. So I was starting to imagine maybe that's how I can present myself and my work and my identity. That yes, I am still defined by what I'm not, because that's how boundaries and that's how space works. But it doesn't need to be the whole picture when you step back and see this kind of individual fingerprint. So I was kind of thinking along those lines. So the next piece that I would like to share is called Love is Love. And a lot of the stuff that I do is kind of, Shane and I were speaking about this we're speaking about a lot of things on the train down here from Aberdeen. And a lot of my performances and things are ephemeral, and I don't write things down, and I'm really, really bad for knowing where to locate things, which is one of the reasons why I'm quite glad I'm going to have a collection, so I can just give people books and say, look, if you're interested, it's in here. And I'm always really surprised when I get invited to places and people say, "Oh yeah, we saw this, that," and I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Could you write it down? Like, where did you? Can you make a spreadsheet so I know where to find things?" So I'm probably a nightmare to I'm like very unarchivable because of just how my scatterbrain approach to performance and things. And as we have, like, you know, this is being recorded, I thought this is a poem that I have performed a couple of times that isn't written down. I don't ever really want to have it in print, but it might be nice to actually have this somewhere. So this is, yeah, the first time this has ever been documented, and maybe the last, who knows, because that's another thing about my performances. Quite often I write stuff down and then I'm like, oh, there's not really any need to revisit that one again. So we'll see how it goes today. Love is love. Love is a 4-letter word in English, the language that colonized and categorized chromosomes and genitalia, a language that manufactured borders between neighbors and genders. I want the right to love, but I also want the right to be a pervert and a deviant. I don't want to assimilate, don't want to abbreviate my freedom to a 4-letter word. I want to do more than just love in English. I want to fuck in black sapphic. I want to tongue in queer hieroglyphics. I want to escape white cis het language through the emergency exit between my thighs. Love is love. Is love the respectable destination you were dreaming of? Can we only love when we are free enough, clean enough? Love is love. Is love the liberating cry you think it is? When you view love as a goal and not a revolutionary process, what do you miss? Let me tell you, a kiss is never just a kiss when it is passed between the lips of queer people who love queer people, who love the radical potential of intimacy between those historically deemed unlovable, who know there is power in fucking the unfuckable, and that salvation is achievable through saliva alone. Love is love, but 4 single letters can't contain us queers, our ass-fucking, lady dick-sucking, myth-busting bodies that shatter bullshit constructs like virginity and purity. But remember, deviancy is a choice, not a prerequisite. Some of us are celibate, and that really fucks with society's definition of what love is. Love is love. And my right to love whoever I love doesn't begin and end with equal marriage. My right to love is my right to freely access abortion and hormones and hysterectomies. My right to love is my right to be loved as whichever name my heart has revealed to me, and that name is love. I feel like I got through that very quickly, so there's maybe I have time for a few more minutes. Yeah, I think that was that a few minutes. Yeah. I'll see what else I've got in there. But that, I mean, I don't think I really need to contextualise that too much, because that's just really basically around feelings of how, yeah, just that the love is love slogan has always felt a bit a bit icky, bit corporate, kind of bit basic, and it feels bad to push against it, because obviously love is love and equal marriage is really worth, you know, fighting for. But I think for me, equal marriage is kind of only worth fighting for because it's like we should be allowed to do what everyone's allowed to do. Mm-hmm. But it's also worthwhile maybe deconstructing the institution of marriage and giving that some thought as well, right? Which I don't think we're able to really do critically if it's just love is love, you know, kind of thing. But it's still very much worth it. I don't want to go around saying that it's not worthwhile. So this is something that I've a very short thing from one of the sections of my up and coming collection. Ooh. It's called Untellings, and the idea behind that is just, you know, maybe retellings or things from a different perspective. And one of my favourite things to do is to make everything gay. Because everything can be gay, right? If you just think, you don't even need to think too hard about it. So this is probably going to change. So this version, this version will probably not end up in the book, so I'm happy to share it here because who knows how it might end up. Everything is gay, probably. Winnie the Pooh is a he-him lesbian. Joan of Arc was executed because the church declared their non-binary haircut an affront to God. Victor, hey, it's just history. I didn't write it, you know. Victor Frankenstein is gay, and so is his dead gay son. 87% of Neanderthals were bi. Not a lot of people know that. Verifiable. Gandalf the Grey, sexual. I'm really proud of that. Is aromantic. Hercules is trans, and obviously Mulan as well. So I think that was just a sort of a playful way of me, saying that it doesn't really matter if something is queer or not, if our historical figure was queer. I mean, I think it's important if there were people who were queer, that we don't erase that history and that can be highlighted and it's not, washed out. But it's, I think it could be fun to just think and reflect and just to queer things. And, the copyright, as we know of Winnie the Pooh, it's all off limits now. So we can say what we want about that bear.
Down the days.
Although I've been waiting so long to out Winnie the Pooh and not feel bad about it. So I think I'll maybe just do one more, and is that probably enough time?
Yeah,
I haven't gone over too much.
No, you don't.
So this is also another kind of sneak preview. The like a lot of young gays, very into Greek mythology growing up. I don't know, that was sort of my special interest. And this is actually a Greek myth that I only found out about quite very, very recently, just kind of earlier on, maybe just a few months ago. And I've always been very familiar, I think some of you here will too as well know about the story of the goddess Artemis, who was out hunting, and then Actaeon peeps her in the woods. She's naked, she's with her virginal crew. She gets annoyed about this and turns him into a stag, and then his own hounds rip him to shreds. So it's really deliciously great story. There's different tellings of it, in some he's an innocent bystander, in others he has actually committed sexual violence against Artemis. And there's another story that kind of has a similar beginning. There's a young person called Cypriates who comes across Artemis in a clearing. She's naked. But instead of this might be seen as a punishment, Cypriates is turned into a woman. And there's only a few lines of this myth in Ovid. It's a really brief reference in Metamorphosis. And when I read this, I thought, oh, that's a really lovely, that could be a very gender euphoric moment for this person who is not punished and turned into a stag and ripped to shreds. So I just thought that was an interesting story that is not really told that much. So this is called Cypriates stumbles across Artemis bathing and is transformed. Her nakedness stings my eyes and throat. My guts grow teeth. If I must, I'll chew myself up, spit out what's left at her feet. How else do I show I'm not a threat? Downstream, time broadens and slows. This is where female rage goes to cool off, a place to reflect and scheme and rejoice, wash off the noise of the day. I know I belong here. The myth of my body is submerged by a soft and damp ambiguity, the fluid spaces between sisters, lovers, hunters, hunted. The wind finds my hiding place and whispers it to her. I wonder if this is where Actaeon stood, intrusively male, moments before his transition from predator to prey. There are infinite ways she could unmake me. Instead of punishing my body, she answers its prayers. Quiet as moss, she casts my name into the river. Its boyish sound reconfigures. Cypress leaves are held against my skin until I bleed into a new shape. A body that doesn't chafe against the truth I hold inside. And I think that's probably time for me. Thank you very much.
Shane, do you want to go? Amazing. I have so many thoughts already, and I if it's alright, I'm going to be cheeky and ask a question before.
Yeah.
Thinking about the Winnie the Pooh poem, which I imagine is not what it's called, did either or both of you have queer icons when you were kids that when you look back you're that's what that was?
Billy the Blue Power Ranger. Didn't know why I was so obsessed, and it turns out he was a homosexual. So that's totally why.
What about you, Mae? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Definitely Winnie the Pooh. No. I'm not even a big Winnie the Pooh fan. I think for me, Mulan was a big, was a big thing for me, and I didn't realize I was like, oh, this gender fucking is very intriguing to me. I didn't know what was going on there, but as I look back, and now I can sort of queer that and have fun with it. But still one of my favorite Disney films, I would say.
And what's your read on Paddington Bear?
I think also
Anyway, sorry about that. Shane, would you like to do your reasons?
How do I live up to they, them, Winnie the Pooh? So, I am going to share work from two different projects that's engaging with archives, and they're kind of feel like old projects now, so I haven't performed some of this in a while, so hopefully I remember how to do this. So the first one I'm going to perform from is called A Bill Gibb Line, and it's a series of poems that are celebrating the fashion designer Bill Gibb, who was from Fraserburgh, which is my hometown up in Aberdeenshire on the very northeast coast. Yeah, big up the Broch. And he was a huge designer in the 1970s. He designed for Elizabeth Taylor, Bianca Jagger, Twiggy was a close friend, and I kind of was always keen to write about his story and really wanted to, and felt that he was overlooked, and people often describe him as the forgotten kind of hero of British fashion, and he wasn't really celebrated enough in our hometown, I think, because I guess there's a little bit in the kind of heritage centre, but now there's going to be a building named after him, which is the old academy, which has been converted into houses, and it'll be called Bill Gibb Court. But at the point I was writing, it just kind of felt like he's starting to slip out of people's minds. But people who do know him and wore his clothes and still own his clothes absolutely love him and admire him, and he it's quite valuable when it comes to vintage clothing. And so I put forward to write a book about him, and to go through the archives at Aberdeen Art Gallery, because they've got all these newspaper clippings and they've got the biggest kind of archive of his work that was gifted from his family. And I learned a lot about how far you can write about a queer person when there's so many gaps, and how much creative license you actually have when he still exists and people's living memories. And there's a lot of contention, I guess, for the family around how he wasn't maybe out during his lifetime, but obviously is out now posthumously, and their feelings about that. So I kept feeling this sense of guilt filling in those gaps, and this kind of sense of I'm doing something wrong maybe, and so pivoted away from a novel towards this kind of podcast that I created of these poems that ended up happening, because when I was looking at his collections and the storytelling in them, I wanted to recreate that storytelling for people, and it felt like poetry was the best way to do that, even within a novel. And then the poems kind of became the thing I loved most about the project, and I ended up filling in the rest of the story by taking snippets of verbatim from lots of different interviews with him telling his own story, so that it was always true to his voice. and what he wanted to share in his lifetime. And the poems are similarly made. So the poems are actually collage in the way that he would collage from different references into like beautiful dresses that took different stylistic features from different periods and cultures, and kind of postmodernists mashed it all up together. And that's what I did with the poetry. A lot of the lines are verbatim from interviews and reviews of his work, and I just found the language of fashion so beautiful in and of itself. So I'll perform a few of them, and I take on different voices to mimic what I think will be a kind of amalgamation of like a newspaper reviewer at the time or Bill Gibb himself. So this is from the Bill Gibb line, and this first one's called The Handsome Cabin, 15th of February 1967. In a pub at the top of Earls Court Road, the barmaid's fancy dress suggests we've entered the Edwardian era. Oh please, with a fashion-forward press, we'll have no trips to the past, dears. At the start of the show we're thrown. Who dares cut a coat in a sweeping curve before dropping plumb straight to the hem? Who pairs lilac and camel in check and mushroom shoulders on a plain white dress? We sigh with relief at trousers caught, harem style in tight anklets, exotic. We're simply sick of mini skirts and feel the pinch on these drafty days. But are lower hemlines here to stay? What novel treatment of traditional tweed, amethyst and white with inverted pleats, and witness the birth of the kilted suit, tartan skirt and brief bolero, and Macmillan rainbow hues. As wildflowers and powder blue, we hunt for seed pearls embroidered on collar and cuff. But on a little black chiffon shift, we cannot miss the sleeve's huge puff. These gay petite clothes are for young, but not cookie clients, who crave individuality. Down in hard-bitten London town we rave. Bill Gibb's name has been made. Okay, so the next one is jumping ahead to his first proper fashion show under his own label at the Oriental Club on the 26th of April 1972. From the tip of her well-coiffured head to the soles of her platform shoes, Kelly's always ready to jump on a jet whenever a camera clicks in some faraway place. This highly individual face left the States and ditched her degree when some guy in Chicago threw stardust in her eyes, saying, "You should be a model, babe!" Half black and half Cherokee, some designers are scared of people staring at her skin instead of the fancy clothes she's in. But Billy knows better. As a coat billows behind her, Kelly glides up the catwalk in a special treat for autumn-winter. A crepe dress edged with lace that she spreads wide like wings. And next her circular skirt swings as her marabou and ostrich hat, feather boa to match, drips with velvet ribbons, glass beads, and fabric flowers made of suede. To finish, she's a minx and lynx hand-painted on a white wool dress with leg and mutton sleeves, and dangling from her neck, suede and leather strings hang down toward her python skin shoes. Between shoots and shows, she's just a blue jean kid who enjoys needlework to keep her mojo flowing. Some penny point, some heroin. But there's no better kick than an audience applause to make her feel like a goddess, especially when she hears them say, "If only I could walk that way." And I'll jump ahead to the doer last poem. It's really sad. Because Gibb died in 1988 at the age of 43 or 44, so quite young, so it feels like there's a lot of lost talent there. This is the Apex Room, Olympia, 16th of March, 1985. Take me as your Bronze Age bride, share my dowry of beaten gold. Whisper to me in silver hues, unravel tangled scrolls of cord. Shear my wool by the river, fox glove me on the soft green ferns. Cave paint me in deep burgundy, drink me in like liquid cork. Patch me up with burnished leather, heal drunkenness, with amethyst, with a touch as rough as tree bark. Let me soften your pewter heart. Abandon long-held fantasies, awake to stark reality. Now I am grey and dressed in lichen. Bury me in clay and sleep beside me. And so that there, you can listen to that podcast for free online. The Bill Gibb line, and it's I did it back in 2018, which feels like a lifetime ago after the pandemic, and then I put a flyer on your seats. But my poetry collection, I was asked by the editor. He said, I really like the Bill Gibb poems, and I feel like they should maybe be like a separate collection. But would you be up for writing one more just for this collection that maybe brings in my work in Scots and Doric, because that's kind of a lot of my work is in North East Scots, and being from Aberdeenshire, and I kind of wanted to kind of keep that going. And Gibb would have grown up speaking in Doric, but then went to London and saying darling, yes darling, like all that. So he had to learn to put it all on, and he found that quite hard to begin with. But then, well, you know, was dressing Elizabeth Taylor, so you know he would definitely do that to have those opportunities. And so I realised that in writing a poem, I realised that I wanted to reflect on some of the things that I'd maybe written for the novel and research I'd done that I didn't get to use in the poems. So some of this is about going to a mart and seeing an animal auction, because his family were from a farming background, so it's kind of like a Billy Elliot story, like farm boy to fashion designer, like really unexpected. And I wanted to reflect on other ways I've engaged with his archive, and one of that is speaking to his family and visiting their homes and seeing one of his sisters in particular was just so helpful. Janet, his middle sister, and she had a beautiful coloured drawing of one of his designs upstairs in our lobby, and it just stuck. I took a photo of it. I'm glad I did, because it ended up inspiring this poem that was kind of trying to bring all these things together to showcase who Gibb was as a person, which I don't think maybe the poems directly state in the earlier project. So this poem is called Just Another Job. At the drop of a hat, I would be off the tractor in the house sketching. I love my family, and I love Scotland, but I had this feeling I was biding my time for something, so I wanted to get away. Yet I don't regard my life today as a terrific contrast to farm life. It's just another job, Bill says. Picturesque. Famed fashion designer Gibb catered out to the merted mod van Wee to help sell his father's livestock, their waists chacked up on a board of an auctioneer bawling, 800 kilos, some coo. As an Aberdeen Angus gings round the ring for rows of mannies with rosy chicks, flat caps and tweed jackets watch, a cairn of their hands making beds for this jet black beauty, her dark barb glistering a bean meaty ribs. But these models are mere contermachus than your Twiggies or Bianca Jaggers. Tucked into this reed-coated heeling coo, her fluffy face looking a wan asloom, as a pile of steam and sharn skitters out onto the fleer. A young chiel is quick to cover the slick wi' hand face of sawdust, as the auctioneer's hammer fa's doon, wi' a skelpit doup she heeds out the route to join the queue for the slaughterhouse. Now it's time for the star of the show, as balls over 1100 kilos. It charges round the ring and the farmers lout back for the rail as horns sleesh the air abeen their heads. Nae woolen matadors here flapping maletas to inflame the fashion of this grunting beast as it heiters about the place where the bids are made. Fan it's sold, aff it gings through the gate, nae worth its weight in sperm, beans and mate. And with that, Billy is back on the train, heading up north to hame again. Billy's sister pints at the framed picture hung up proudly in her upstairs lobby, an exclusive design for Daily Mirror by Bill Gibb Couture. It's a watercolour. A reed-headed quine with a silk robe slipping off her shoulder, flowing down to her ankles in mint green and rosy pink pleats, and golden sandals strapped to her feet. I'd say, Billy, she looks like coo's hoofs. And he would just laugh at me. But they do. For the shape and line, you see what she means. Skinning your inky legs teeter on wedges that would mark you mince a boot like a sou, if you'd nae a coo's poise and infirmity. Oh, Billy was just an ordinary man, and a man that was extraordinary. The other project I'm going to read, just a wee bit of it, is another archival dig, and this was to celebrate the centenary of Muriel Sparks' birth back in 2018 as well. And so I got funding for Creative Scotland to dig around the National Library of Scotland's holdings. Basically, I think it's like just all of Muriel Sparks' archive. And I was really, the reason I ended up working on projects because Aberdeen's twinned with Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and I did an arts and hospitals project, twinning exchange there, and ended up working in the hospital for Muriel Spark. Muriel Spark gave birth to her son because she went to what was then Rhodesia for several years of her early adulthood with a very violent husband who she ended up having to basically run away from and leaving her child behind due to various restrictions as a woman at the time. And it was really interesting. I tried to piece together snippets of her archive that she hidden and shared in her writing, and things that was in her own short fiction. A lot of her early short fiction, her earliest writings are about kind of inspired by this time, and they're clearly quite autobiographical. And I was quite conscientious of my experience in Zimbabwe and the kind of reflections I had on being a gay person there, and kind of travelling with this older white woman from Aberdeen who was really kind of would get stressed if I spoke about being gay in public there. She was just a bit like, oh no, somebody will attack you, or like she thought it was like she just had like really kind of limited perceptions of life there, and actually it was a completely opposite experience working with artists there who were very open-minded and were doing as much as they could to support queer artists and young people there. So that was in the back of my mind, and then also in the kind of interestingly in these early writings of Spark, the characters, it's the only time I think the characters really directly address sexuality, and she lived the last 30 years of her life with a woman, and there's a lot of the press would go, okay, it's obviously a lesbian relationship, but it's not quite clear cut. They would, I think, often refer to each other as companions, and maybe a homo-romantic relationship, maybe not necessarily homosexual, but I wasn't going to go into all that and make assumptions like people have, because I just didn't think that was fair. But there's basically this two narratives. There's her story, and then there's this kind of story of a modern day person, a gay doctor visiting from Aberdeen, and it's kind of got that queer aspect without directly maybe addressing her potential queerness. But I thought I'd read a bit from one of these early stories that she wrote that I think is quite interesting, because it kind of hints towards asexuality, and writing about that in the 60s, when that wasn't maybe something that was kind of done. So this is from Bang Bang You're Dead, one of her early short stories. For some years she'd been thinking she was not much inclined towards sex. After the third affair, this dawned and rose within her as a whole realisation, as if in the past when she had told herself, I am not predominantly a sexual being, or I'm rather a frigid freak, I suppose. These were the sayings of an illiterate, never quite rational and known until now. But after the third affair, the notion was so intensely conceived as to be almost new. It appalled her. She lay on the shady stoop, her fever subsiding, and examined her relations with men. She thought, what if I married again? She shivered under the hot sheet. Can it be, she thought, that I have a suppressed tendency towards women? She lay still and let the idea probe round in imagination. She surveyed with a stony inward eye all the women she had known, prim little academicians with cream Peter Pan collars on their dresses, large dominant women, a number of beauties, conventional nitwits like Ariadne. No, really, she thought, neither men nor women. It is not a caring for sexual relations. It is not merely a lack of pleasure in sex, it is dislike of the excitement. And it is not merely dislike, it is worse. It is boredom. So I'll just read a wee bit from the book that I thought kind of reflecting on, life without men, and at the point where she was living with another woman who was struggling to get by in Bulawayo. So this is the 14th of November 1941, below you. It was always something of a relief for Muriel to slowly open her eyes each morning and see that the wall above her was not puckered with bullet holes. She sat up and realised she'd fallen asleep amongst her books and papers again. The last thing she'd scribbled down in her notebook was a line from one of Kierkegaard's journals. Not until a man has inwardly understood himself and then sees the course he is to take does his life gain peace and meaning. She looked over at Sonny's bed. His nanny Esther must have come in at some point and taken him away. Muriel was thankful not to have been woken by either of them. She stayed up quite late reading, and she'd been invited to a dance night at the Grand Hotel. She would need to reserve her energy for that. There was a knock. Mae's beautiful ash blonde hair slowly appeared round the side of the door. Like Muriel, Mae had reluctantly found herself having to raise a child on her own, as her husband had gone off to fight in the war. There was no passage home available to women, and strictly none for their children. Living together had seemed the best way to make the most of what little resources they had, mainly Esther and Mae's chef Moses, in order to endure this life so distant, so different from home. Sorry to bother you, but Esther tells me that Moses is sick this morning, Mae said with a slight waver to her voice. We'll have to prepare breakfast ourselves. Can you come and help me? I couldn't possibly. It's imperative I finish this volume before I head to work. I'll lose the thread of it if I leave it until after this weekend. And besides, I've never prepared a breakfast in my life. Can't Esther do it? Her hands are rather full looking after Sonny and Gail. Knowing Mae's eyes would follow hers, Muriel sighed and stared over at the Rhodesian Eisteddfod award tickets pinned up on the wall opposite her bed. The first was for a poetry win in the spring of 1939. The second was a prose award from the summer just past. Very well, Mae said quietly. I'm sure I'll manage on my own. Thank you. Oh, and I'll have a cup of tea if you're boiling the kettle. Mae sniffed a laugh before making her way back out of the room. She was one for the books herself, a classic scholar, but she seemed not to be as devoted to reading as Muriel. It was as though having a degree had proved her capabilities as a thinker, and she no longer felt as eager to participate in the engagement of the mind. Muriel had no university degree and felt her award certificates were her only validation she had to pursue her studies. An hour later, having completed her reading in the bath, dressed for work and eaten Mae's rather underwhelming attempt at breakfast, Muriel gave Sonny a kiss goodbye on his wee head and handed him his stuffed bunny. Today he looked a little more like her father and a little less like Ozzy. She preferred these days.
You're both such lovely readers. Like, that was an absolute joy to listen to. Shane, there was something you said before the event where you alluded to what goes wrong when we work with archives. Could you talk about that a wee bit? And Mae, I'm sure you'll have some points to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think I'd actually did the Muriel Spark project first before the Bill Gibb one, and I think because there was, she did actually have a biographer that she worked with, but she was really pissed off with the stuff he ended up writing. So she must have forgotten she told him some of it, but I think he'd embellished a little bit, or she felt like he embellished or dramatised. And the reality as a writer is you need to create a story, and I'm working on like kind of creative memoir on my own childhood right now, and I'm realising I have to think of myself as a character, and I have to sometimes twist what happened for narrative effect. Otherwise it just doesn't work on like a plot level, or I mean, because I've chosen to write in something that is closer to story rather than fact-based autobiography as such. So I find that I can imagine a biographer really struggling with that balance, especially if they're working directly with that person. So we're doing it with an archive and the person isn't there and the licenses you're taking. I think I managed to kind of sidestep some issues by having this other character in this contemporary set story that kind of could maybe say the things I maybe would have been interested to do introspectively with Muriel Spark, but she's a known figure. People love her work, and I was kind of conscious of not doing that. But then with Bill Gibb, I did take that risk, and I learned from like sharing it with his family and stuff that it wasn't going to go down well, and that it was hard to accept that in the work I put into it. But it made me more creative because it made me focus on the poems and do something. I made a film, I worked with students, fashion students who create new work, I wore the clothes, I did all this stuff that actually I've learned so much from that came out of failure and doing the wrong thing initially. So I'm actually interested in this blood in the ethics and the kind of risk you take around archives in that way. So
Mae, do you find that because we were talking about how sometimes you're not just looking for what's there, you're looking for what's not, do you find that you have the same worries about taking, I guess, licenses or trying to craft more of a narrative than...
I think the one that I've come into like the greatest conflict with from like a sort of personal level is excuse me, using religious figures, specifically Christianity. I wouldn't go near anyone else's religion because that's not my space to do that in. And I found that to be for me a little bit like, I don't know, I felt a bit like chicken. So I have a poem called Gay Jesus, and the first time when I performed that in front of my dad, that was I was like, oh, do I need to? And I prefaced it with an apology to my, because he was there in the audience, and then afterwards, you know, he wasn't like critical or anything. He said something that was kind of like typically like vague and ambiguous of my dad, that said something like, oh yeah, well, you know, the Bible was written a long time ago, who knows what was, you know, what was or wasn't true. And I think that was his way of saying, you know, well, technically it could have been gay, we wouldn't be any the wiser probably. So that kind of felt like a big win for me. But I guess there's a lot of Jesus's descendants and followers who would maybe take more of an issue. And I think, there are things that are slightly sensitive. And I think when you're queering something, though, I mean, the way that I look at it with like the Gay Jesus poem is, it's not, you know, I'm not saying that he was a bad guy. I'm not even saying that he was gay. Like, it's obviously, it's for effect. It's a stylistic, there's a broader point being made. But it's not an insult to say that Jesus was gay, right? So like, for people to maybe take issue with that, kind of like, but that's something that I have written some more poems. I'm working more towards that, like using things that have, you know, happened in the Bible and you know, I was going to say characters. people from the IP of the Bible multiverse. So yeah, I think it's not something I've had a lot of concerns with before, but I think now it is something that I'm starting to think with, and I think I do need to be ready with how because I don't ever want to be, you know, disrespectful to what people believe, but I want people to understand that it's actually not a critique of Christianity or these figures. It's actually a way of making them accessible to queer people, which I think is what we deserve as queer people, to have that as much as anyone else who's living in this Western culture where we've been, you know, indoctrinated with Christianity for a long time and live with those implications.
I feel like there's something in there about authority and interpretation. Like, when you're coming at the archive, do you feel an ownership of the archive, or do you feel that, like, if, say, queer history isn't represented, do you still feel an ownership of what you're reading?
I think, well, it's difficult. It depends on the material. For me, I've realised, depends how long the person's been dead. If it's a dead person, are they still in living memory? Because it's not just about like an authority of their own version of events, but multiple versions of events and views of respecting someone's legacy, or and that also stands for, like, not, you know, non-celebrities, you know, everyday people that you might end up writing about. I think the further they're in the past, the easier it is to play with that. But then, dealing with something sacred is a different story.
Yeah, I think there is a really fine balance with that, because I don't even feel like I own the things that I've written. To be quite honest, I feel like once I've written something and performed it, it's kind of just there for everyone else to do with what they want. I'm always amazed at like what people take away from things that I've written. I'm like, well, I'm not that clever. That's really interesting that you. Like, this happened to me recently. There was I think it was from the Doric anthology. Someone who works at the University of Aberdeen had written like questions and for this poem to be like kind of studied, and
Mm-hmm.
a poem that I'd written, and like one of the questions was like, oh, this phrase is an oxymoron. Why do you think it's been used? And I was like, I know what an oxymoron is. I have half an English degree. And I was like, oh, I didn't realise that, and I still couldn't figure it out even after. But so it's always really interesting to me and I'm happy for people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as long as if people are saying, you know, maybe bad stuff about it, like, oh, you've done this and that's. But then I'm also open to that. If I were to sit here and say something and then somebody said afterwards, actually, do you know what, that was kind of ableist what you said there. I would be very willing to hear that and be like, oh, that, you know, I didn't see that. Could you explain to me how you were seeing it, you know, to understand that perspective, if that, you know. But I think once my poems are out there, I don't really care what as I said, I don't even know where to find them. So they really are for other people, and I think that's where the magic happens. It doesn't really happen when I like the process of writing. For me, it's kind of like a puzzle. There's like a poem in there somewhere, I get it, and when I figured it out, I know when it's finished. And then it goes away and people can, experience it for themselves.
It's funny actually about, if, you know, if feeling connected to the words you've written, if they feel like they're even yours anymore, but I'm working directly with verbatim a lot, but it isn't my words.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really conscious of, have I collaged and played around with this enough creatively to the point it's something new, or am I actually stealing someone's intellectual property? And that's something that I'm conscious of as well. So like to take these, I do credit my sources in publication of these poems, because the beauty of the language was created by someone else a lot of the time, but I've mashed up enough and it's almost like they probably didn't even remember writing some of these things from like some random review in like The Guardian in 1983. Like the author will not remember even probably going to the event, but being conscious of respecting the fact that it is technically not my words initially, and I've done verbatim projects where I listen in on conversations in Aberdeen and turn that into a stage show, and but I've realised now that, you know, I'm doing this to other people, and right now I'm working on a project where I'm doing it with my own archive, and I'm using home videos and actually using verbatim of me speaking as a child, but also my family. And that's made me really think about what I was doing with what I wanted to do with Bill Gibb originally, and how actually his family felt, how I feel about doing this with my family. It's made me really go, okay, I can totally understand why they were like, what are you doing with our history and our legacy and his, you know. So it's a lot, a bit of a minefield, to be honest. But I just think there's something anyone could do, and I really love doing workshops where I've done Bill Gibb inspired workshops where I've taken old Vogue articles for different designers and got folk to cut them up and make their own poem, and just have a go at that process with archives. And it's for people who've never written a poem. They're suddenly like, oh, I can see how poetry works now, because I've played around with someone else's words. I didn't have the pressure of it being my words. But I'm always then conscious of like, what am I actually saying what I want to say? Because I'm just working with other people's language, really. It's a bit of a strange one.
I'm aware of times we're going to go audience questions, but I have like so many other things I want to ask you guys. Does anybody have a question? I'll ask a question and you can have a think while I'm asking that question. The thing that you're saying about personal archive is really interesting to me. Like, when you're doing your writing, do you think about how it's going to be archived in the future, or when you look at your own work, are you like surprised by it at the time, or like in retrospect? I don't know. Like, me, what do you think?
I think because I still have quite a lot of imposter syndrome, and like calling myself a writer, or like it still doesn't feel like it's maybe part of me. It's just like, oh, sometimes I do this writing thing, and then people ask to see it and share it. So I think I am constantly surprised by what I've done, because a lot of the time I forget that's happened. But I have not thought too much about legacy and longevity. I think for me it is very much in the moment, and I think I get quite a lot from events like this, where I can actually see people, where I can talk to people like before and afterwards. For me, all of that conversation and all the things that happen is as much, that's as part of the pieces that I'm, because it's all a sort of like holistic set, and it all comes together. So I feel like everyone that's here today, I'm always so grateful for people that come, because they're, you know, you're holding the space and you're contributing to it. So for me, it's sort of like, it's very much is in the presence. I don't know, that might change when I'm, you know, going to have a book, I guess, that's going to stick around. This is a thing I was saying to Shane earlier. I was like, it's going to have to be, like, at least I'll have to like most of it, because it's there once it's in print, you know, like, you know, I think most people today, once they leave, they're not going to remember everything I've said, but they might remember bits, or how they felt, how they enjoyed, and that's the important part to me. But when you have a book, you can kind of look and say, oh yeah, and go back to it, and it doesn't change. At least, like, the physical copy doesn't change, but for me every performance is slightly different. So I really like that aspect, and I think that's where I am more in those moments. So I guess I don't think about the future too much. Yeah.
I was, when I was an undergrad and I did a creative writing course, Alan Spence told me to think about saving drafts, holding on to drafts, because that is the thing that if you become famous you'll sell to libraries and make money back from. But also for me it's the way I've accessed, like, I've looked through James Kelman's archive and I've learned a lot from that. Muriel Sparks, I've looked through Lewis Grassic Gibbons, and I think there is an issue now in the digital age, the loss of archives and the loss of process. So I do try and print out a draft of big projects every now and again, and I'll do my edits by hand on those drafts and date them. And it's really helpful for me to go back and realise how shit I used to be, to feel like, oh, I have progress. But also there is an issue with, like, what's published, because I used to be in, like, the Creative Writing Society when I was younger at Aberdeen, and we did, like, anthologies, and I literally want to burn every copy of those books when I see them, because it was embarrassingly, like, the fact I wanted to be a writer and I was writing such crap is, but then it is, you know, I think it's like, yeah. Then I feel like, well, at least I must be better than that now, but I'm probably going to look back on some of what I wrote today, but why did I do that? Even looking back at the nevertheless of this book, I'm like, like, I'm writing, probably trying to ape Muriel Sparks' voice a little bit. It's a lot more subjective and erudite than I write. Like, it's not my voice at all, so it's like really strange to look back on your own writing archive in that way as well. Especially because you do a lot of work in Scots, and that's just, you haven't even heard a lot of that today at all, really.
Have you got any audience questions? Or I'll keep going. Love it. I thought it was really interesting what you said there about losing process because of the digital age. Do you think people assume that because something's on the internet, it's archived?
Probably. And I was just saying to me, I was just thinking, it's like, I've got like a random, like, hidden Facebook album of childhood photos that are losing every year. I realise the pixelation's going down in those. I'm like, I don't know where the original copies are, so this is just like a bad, corrupted file now.
Yeah, I think we're just so used to outsourcing memory to social media, to the internet, to digital spaces. I don't need to remember anyone's birthday. You know, I just get a notification and then send them a belated message. You know, so yeah, and I think it's taken for granted that it's like, oh, that's a space where this stuff is, but then it's like, what? I still don't know what the cloud is. I don't want to know. Nobody explain it to me. Don't ruin the surprise. But it doesn't yet, unless I have something that's physically in my hands. I don't really, kind of believe that it's real. So for a while I would write everything out, and then I started. I was like, I discovered Google Docs. I was like, oh yeah, this is actually a lot easier, and I can access this from anywhere. And now I don't have all that stuff, and I think I do need to. I need to at least print stuff off, write it out, because otherwise I'm like, where is that going to go? But I think it still seems very new, I think, everything being in this digital space. And I think it's like, we haven't quite figured out where that's going to go. I think collectively, if you understand what the cloud is, you're probably, I think if you're someone that has more computer literate than I am, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, we're heading for a digital dark age in like the next 5 years probably. Like 80% of all content ever created is just going to like be inaccessible or whatever. So I'm just like going to start making mix CDs again, I think, for when Spotify collapses.
Do you think that the way people interact on the internet as like a tool to like go through history is different to how people interact with physical archives?
I think the time and concentration you spend when you're digitally researching and engaging with archives that way, I think it's like, oh, I'll just search for the word, and if it's been archived to that level where they've actually been able to scan the text, and you can just find what you need out of it. But I think if you have a physical text where you've got to dwell in it and spend time with it, you understand you just get a closer engagement with that period. I find when I've done longer periods in the National Library, for instance, and I'll just like hide my phone from myself and
Yeah, I think it's true of a lot of things. That I think that the internet is great and it's very useful, but I think a lot of things are devoid of context from there. If you're just, as you're saying, just pulling up a few pages or whatever, you don't get the bigger picture. And I think that can be extrapolated to just anything that happens on the internet. You can get that wider context. It's accessible, it's available, but the way that we are consuming information is that we're probably not going to choose to do that. We're just going to go and get the chunks that we need, and then take from. So, I think that the possibility to have things that are very devoid of context is perhaps greater than it would be if you have the whole entire book in front of you, like you're going through all these tomes and getting paper cuts or whatever.
Physically in the space as well.
Yeah.
I like being there. I think that's we got. Sorry,
3 o'clock now.
It's 3 o'clock. Okay, that's us done. I've got so many other things to say to you, but I know you need to get a train home, and I'm sure you all have trains to get home. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this event. Thank you, Shane, and thank you, Mae, for chatting with me. It's been lovely. Hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you.